Joining us right now is Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Colonel, good to see you.
Good to see you.
So we want to talk about a few things today. First of all, is this the right approach to Russia? And I also want to get your take on the National Security Advisor issues that are going on.
Right. Well, first off, look, you've got to make it very clear that you're going to change the way the United States approaches Russia. So the way you do that is say, we're going to start looking at things. And I think it started, frankly, we'll talk about Mike Flynn in a second, with Mike Flynn. I think Mike probably outlined some of the things that were going to change under the Trump administration versus the Obama administration. With that said, General Mattis has said very clearly in the past, and I think during confirmations, the Russians are an issue. And General Joe Dunford, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, during his confirmations hearings about 2 years ago, said that the Russians are our largest threat we have to deal with globally. So I think you now have in place individuals who will not allow for the Russians to do the dangerous flyovers in the North Atlantic when they were flying over our ships. At the same time, we do recognize we have to collaborate at some level in places like Syria, where they're invited, we're not, and we're trying to help take Aleppo back, and that's a difficult situation. So there may be some places we can overlap and work together. Other places we're not going to be able to.
Yeah, I want to get your take on the Russia story, but also Bob Harward, the president's choice to succeed Michael Flynn as National Security Advisor, turns down the job. How does this happen? I mean, was it not checked beforehand that, look, I want you as National Security Advisor? I mean,
this is a bit dicey right now. Look, everything I've heard indicates that the admiral wanted to bring in his own folks. This is routine. This has been going on behind the scenes from day one. Those cabinet level members, to include people at that level, want to have people both that they can rely upon, that they're loyal to both ways, and are effective. So when you have someone coming into a position like that, where you have to have literally real-time ability to task people and know what they're going to do, and I don't know you necessarily, I don't feel comfortable. I think that's what happened here. I don't think he was going to get full scope of who he wanted.
That's what you said, Dagan.
It was K.T. McFarland, who was a Fox News contributor, who we all know very well.
Right, I know.
She was Michael Flynn. She was General Flynn's deputy.
Correct.
And according to reports that President Trump told her, you can stay, and that therein lies the issue. That it was
he wanted his own deputy,
right? And
some other folks possibly too.
That's the decision of the president. But again, I think the worrisome thing is that you don't have somebody lined up directly to step into the role, and then you have these press reports of you have an individual turning down the job.
Right. Well, it just gives the media more. There's chaos, and that's what you're seeing this morning. But it's perfectly plausible that the incoming National Security Advisor would want his own team, but I like the loyalty that Trump is showing to the people who are already there. I like KT.
I can't disagree with the loyalty. The issue becomes then you have to do a balance, and I think this is what it came down to. It's like, do I take the new guy and do this other thing or not? And this has been, I've heard some other names coming up now as additional nominees. I think there's some really good officers out there that could take the place. So I don't think all is lost. It's just going to take some more time to sort through this.
Let's get to what Russia here, because Russia seemingly testing the waters with President Trump, literally sending a spy ship up and down the East Coast. It was most recently spotted 65 miles off the coast of Virginia. Colonel, is this an act of aggression? What is Russia trying to do here?
They're absolutely testing us. The North Koreans are testing us. Everybody's testing us. This is typical of an incoming administration. What I'll say about Russia is that you need to start pushing back. We have not, over the past 5 years, pushed back at all. And I would start considering some Cold War things we did to the Russians to come back. As a matter of fact, I've talked to senior leaders. I think we ought to look at some of the Cold War tactics we used to use.
Colonel, what do we do in that circumstance? So if there is a ship off our shores, how do we respond to that? Do we send some of our ships, escort it out? I mean, what do you take? What type of measures should you take?
Let me hit that in the general and specific. First, in general, you start looking at ways of doing things antagonistic back in other areas. You don't have to do it there, you have to do it somewhere else. But for this thing, if it's in international waters, there's not much you can do to it. With that said, there's things you can make them very uncomfortable. You can shadow them, you put the spotlight on them, there's things like that. So there's other things that are classified. But I'm just saying that you need to make a decision, a policy decision, that you're not going to be passive, and that's the issue right now.
Why is Russia doing it? What are they what are they trying to do? Because it's not just the spy ship off of Norfolk. It's the buzzing the USS Porter. It's moving the nuclear-tipped missiles.
Putin is a thug. Putin is a criminal, but he's the leader of the country. And so his basic premise is, I can do what I want, I'm going to push the envelope. And he wants to reestablish the old Soviet empire. So he's been going down this path for years.
But if you say that it's typical behavior with a new administration, how come we're talking about it so much now, like as if it's against Donald Trump, or President Trump, if this is something that's fairly typical behavior?
Well, that's the point. It's like this all started under President Obama, and I think what we're trying to do now, and I agree with General Mattis and Mr. Tillerson, is that you have to basically kind of say, look, I'm going to give you a chance to fix things without getting nasty. But, you know, it's kind of the art of the deal.
But it also has to do with the way that Donald Trump talked about Putin and talked about Russia on the campaign trail. Some people were bothered by it because they see Putin as a thug.
He is a thug.
Right. That's how they view him.
Yes.
They view Russia as the greatest threat to the United States and our freedom. And when Donald Trump talked glowingly at times about Vladimir Putin, that's why people are troubled about it now with this administration.
Well, let's remember, Reagan had to reach out to Gorbachev.
Right.
I mean, there was a whole process of glasnost and all this other stuff. I lived through that time. So I do recognize that there was even then this concern about what are we doing with the Russians. But you got to do both. You got to show a very strong hand to say there's going to be consequences for bad behavior. At the same time, I'm willing to talk to you.
I feel like Rex Tillerson is really getting into this role seamlessly. He's appearing to come across very well as Secretary of State. But I want to point this out. CBS News is reporting that Rex Tillerson's aides laid off several staffers at the State Department yesterday. Officials reportedly fear that the cuts were politically driven by the White House. Do you think that's the case? Look, we know that President Trump put in a hiring freeze. For one of the first things that he did when he got
Reagan did that. When I first moved out to Washington in '87, I was hired during a hiring freeze because we could hire just one replacement. So this is not new, and I'm glad he did it.
What about the cuts, though?
Well, look, I think the cuts may have been individuals who may have been suspected of doing some things relating to leaking information. There's been leaks coming out. No, I'm not joking.
No. I'm laughing
serious
because you were saying it and I was thinking.
Yeah, you know, and I said it last night on 100 Days. Like, look, we have problems within the intelligence community, within the Department of Defense and State Department with people kind of deciding that, oh, hey, this piece of paper is going to hurt Donald Trump. I'm going to give it to someone to help hurt it. So you have to understand that that's going on right now.
Maybe we need a couple less bureaucrats, too, and Rex Tillerson recognizes that, okay? I mean, the State Department could be bloated. We even saw the Department of Defense come out with that research report on their own saying they could save $150 billion, right? So I'm sure there's their own internal studies where they're like, okay, we can probably trim some fat. So when he came in, he's like, all right, let's start.
And Pentagon has more civilians today than during the height of the Cold War. How's that possible?